Do you hear something?
Is that fucking Mike Breen?
James catches, puts up a three. Won't go. Rebound Bosh. Back out to Allen. His three-pointer. Bang! Tie game with 5 seconds remaining.
All right, guys, away team here for our next episode in the season recap series we're doing. We've got Dallas and Memphis coming today. Let's dive right into Memphis, the Memphis Grizzlies.
I gotta say, I got a big smile on my face this whole episode, and apologies if it runs a little long, but these are two teams that really exceeded expectations in a lot of ways this season.
Yeah, it's interesting doing this team after the Pelicans, because I think if you did a top 5 brightest futures, these two teams and the Pelicans would be in the mix there.
Memphis in particular completely erased their past in a way, basically stripped out the drywall down to the studs, and they started doing this by firing their team executive Chris Wallace last April. Overall, I think we can say with confidence he was pretty bad.
Hashim Tadid!
He was pretty bad. He had some redeeming qualities, I would say. He picked Jaren Jackson at number 4, pretty good pick, and he got a good return for Marc Gasol.
Yeah, I'm not saying he didn't get value there, but to not get a first-round pick and instead get 2 seconds, Delon Wright and Valanciunas, I thought was a bit of an undersell.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think that kind of is really clear once you look at the stuff that Jason Wexler, their new team president, who was a hire from elsewhere within the organization, what he was able to achieve with what they had in comparison to Chris Wallace, right?
Right. If we're saying that the Marc Gasol trade is the best thing that Chris Wallace did in his, fucking 15 years with the Grizzlies, right?
It was definitely time for, I think, a change of scenery for them. Not only did they fire him, they also fired J.B. Bickerstaff, who somehow has weaseled his way into so many head coaching roles after orchestrating a coup against the previous head coach, I can only imagine. And they hired a former Milwaukee assistant coach, Taylor Jenkins. If you asked almost every NBA fan, they would tell you absolutely nothing about him because no one really knew anything about him. I'm sure the front office knew a little bit more, and I think it was a pretty good payoff for them, as we'll see. But at the beginning of the season, you have to understand that these are two unproven guys that you're slotting into two of the most important front office roles, if not the two most important front office roles.
Yeah, I remember when they hired Taylor Jenkins. He had been an assistant coach on the Atlanta Hawks, my favorite team, for 5 years. And I had no idea who this guy was.
Yeah. I think the big story that everyone cares about the most is their number 2 draft pick last year, Ja Morant, who we both really liked.
We were so high on him.
He looked amazing. First NCAA player to average 20 points and 10 assists in a season, which is even more impressive considering the shorter games of the NCAA and the slower pace. I personally think that in any other year, he could easily be a number 1 pick. It just so happened that Zion Williamson exists and is a biological freak of nature.
Yeah, the thing is so is Ja Morant. The guy was dunking NBA all-star dunks in college. But on top of that, he's scoring 20 points per game on pretty good efficiency and dishing out 10 assists. So yeah, Ja Morant, number 2, extremely easy decision for Memphis. They did have another pick, which they acquired in the Mike Conley trade. They trade Conley to Utah for Grayson Allen, Kyle Korver, Jay Crowder, the 23rd pick in the draft, which was later flipped for the 21st pick, and a 2020 first-round draft pick protected 1 through 7 and 15 through 30. So basically, if it doesn't go in 2020 in the late lottery, it will become a lightly protected pick in 2021 and then extending further into the future.
It's pretty easy to say that that's not happening this year. Who knows what Utah's future is looking like? Because in the West, you never know who's going to end up in the playoffs, who isn't. Every team in the West next year, almost every team, will have a good reason to believe that they can make the playoffs. Yeah. So there's going to be 7 teams that are going to be sad about it.
Also, who knows if there's going to be an NBA season next year, so let's not get too far ahead of ourselves.
Very true. So that 21st pick becomes Brandon Clark, who's a little bit older, played in college for a few years, so I think that was the biggest reason that he fell in the draft, but he was extremely ready to play. And I think absolute steal. We'll get more into him later, but in terms of a late first round pick, you can't do much better than Brandon Clark.
Yeah. I was reading in the lead up to the draft, people were saying he's the most athletic big other than Zion in the draft. And I don't think that's hyperbole. The guy's a monster. He looks undersized, but his verticality is so large that he plays like 6 inches taller, you know?
Yeah. So also they jumped in on the Golden State Nets sign and trade and were able to take Iguodala off the Warriors' hands in exchange for a 2024 first round pick that's top 4 protected. You take that protection any day from the Warriors, let's be honest. And he just doesn't play or even accompany the team at all. I think Ja tried to start some beef on Twitter, which I understand. You know, you have a chip on your shoulder, you're bound for the playoffs, and this guy basically treated you like you were a nobody team. At the same time, it doesn't really matter for them. As we'll see, they had a pretty good season regardless, and he wasn't part of their future plans. I think it more speaks to his character than anything else.
I did think that Iguodala got a little bit too much criticism for sitting out the season when the reporting at the time of the trade was that it was a mutual decision for him not to play. Like, the Grizzlies had told him, we think it's better if you don't play any minutes for us.
And that might just be because they knew they were trading him later and they didn't want to risk him getting injured. Who knows?
Right, and it also could have been because they thought they were going to trade him earlier in the season. I don't have any information about how long they were trying to trade him for, but you've got to think that they were dangling him at the beginning of the season all the way into the All-Star break.
Definitely. So in terms of less important trades for them, but this one's probably the last really important trade that we'll talk about. So they flip Kyle Korver and Javon Carter to Phoenix and get Josh Jackson, who's a rebuilding project.
Right.
DeAnthony Melton, who Phoenix I think had written off a little bit prematurely, as we'll see. And they get 2 second-round picks for it, which are 36 to 60 protected. If you're trading with Phoenix, that's not a problem.
The next few trades we're going to talk about, we can just kind of talk about them in summation. They're really just gathering assets, unloading larger contracts, getting some second-round picks. They sign and trade Delon Wright to the Mavericks for 2 second-round picks.
And Satnam Singh's rights, even though he will never step foot in the NBA or possibly North America ever again.
Satnam Singh, if you've never seen a picture of him, check out the picture of him next to the baby. His head is literally as big as this baby. And then after that, they just traded massive contracts with the Hawks, giving them Parsons for Solomon Hill and Miles Plumlee.
I'm still confused as to why the Hawks took on this massive contract without getting any assets in return, even like a 55 through 60 pick. Who knows? But I think all of these trades speak to the idea that this team has made a massive improvement in their front office over the last offseason, and the new president was really showing this through the series of trades in which they acquired a ton of picks. And some players like DeAnthony Melton that would end up playing very significant minutes for them and even getting slotted into starter roles near the end of the season. I think that teams were kind of not taking them seriously last year. No one was really talking about them as if they were a factor. And I think that kind of let them get more return than they otherwise might. But when you look at the trades that they've continued to make in the season, it does seem like the front office is still able to get really good deals for everything that they have.
Look, you can get better deals in trades when all you're worried about is getting future assets. And that's what they were doing during the summer, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot harder to get a good return on a trade when you're trading for a win-now move.
Yeah, absolutely. And they have so many assets now that they can easily bundle this up, especially if they have a player that they want to get rid of and get a decent return for it. I mean, it's really the best haul that you can hope for after losing Mike Conley and Marc Gasol, ending one era and starting another.
Yeah, and just getting into free agency a little bit, it's more of the same. They got Jonas Valanciunas, who they acquired in the trade with the Toronto Raptors for 3 years, $45 million. And then they grabbed Tyus Jones, who hadn't played many minutes for the T-Wolves, but in the few minutes that I saw him play with the Wolves, I always thought he should play more.
He was averaging close to 2.5 steals per 36. He was only playing 18 minutes a game, but that's really promising when you look at that if you're a team that just needs a serviceable backup point guard to Ja Morant.
Right. So 3 years, $26.4 million for him, I thought was a pretty good deal too.
Definitely. And then probably the one bad move that they made last offseason, and you can't really fault them for it, was they signed a EuroLeague sharpshooter named Marko Guduric, who in 18-19 had a 48% three-point season for Fenerbahce, which is insane. And they signed him for 2 years, $5 million. So in terms of bad moves, really this is the best bad move you can hope for. Didn't really pan out. That's okay.
Right. I mean, with Marko Guduric in 2021, 2022, we might see him in a pool somewhere playing Marco Polo.
I would buy tickets to that. So yeah, I mean, in terms of expectations coming into the season, this is a team with a brand new identity, with players and coaches that haven't proven anything yet. And I think rightfully a lot of publications and Vegas especially, which gave them a 27.5 over-under, underestimated them quite a bit. Obviously, they exceeded that in a shortened season, which is very impressive. And the adage, you lose a lot, but you're getting minutes, you're learning a lot, right? Well, they got to win, and they also got to get minutes.
Right, and they had a couple veterans on the roster. I think going into the season, the expectation was that they would trade those for more future assets. So, yeah, we thought this team was going to be terrible, and they start the season, and they were pretty terrible.
Yep.
They started the season 6-16, really awful.
And 4 of those 6 wins were within 4 points, so you could cough it up to a fluke.
But their season sort of turned around in 2020 in the new calendar year. After losing to Sacramento on January 2nd, they blew out the Clippers, beat them by 26 points, beginning a 7-game winning streak. In those 7 games, they beat Houston, San Antonio, Phoenix, and then finally lost to New Orleans and Boston.
But then they won 4 in a row after that, including against Denver. And between that 6-16 start and the All-Star break, they would accumulate a 22-10 record over that point, which is very impressive.
Right. I mean, it basically catapults them to the 8th seed.
Yeah, and they also were able to demonstrate that they could win against above 500 teams consistently, with wins against Utah, Miami, OKC, in addition to those wins against the Clippers, the Rockets, and the Nuggets, as well as the Mavericks. And they also blew out the Lakers by almost 20 points, which who could have expected that?
Unexpected is the word that both of us used when we were prepping for this.
Yeah,
right.
Shocked.
Shocked.
I was in shock.
Flabbergasted.
Flabbergasted. They also blew out both the Hawks and the Nets by 40 points before the season ended, so that's a pretty good way to cap it off before the suspension, let's say.
For sure. We all love it when the Hawks get destroyed.
What else could you ask for as a Hawks fan?
Yeah, so why were they so good? That is the question on everyone's mind. And the answer to that is just how much Ja Morant exceeded expectations. Like, even for believers like us, I don't think we had any idea that he was going to do what he did.
Yeah, I mean, he already feels like a star. He has the poise, the talent, the big dick energy, and just this fuck you mentality. Dude, he almost posterized Kevin Love, but instead just teabagged him. Who comes into the league doing that? I don't know. It's about as good as you can ask for when you just completely rebuild your franchise to have someone that comes in who's 19 years old, who's already playing with such intelligence, such good reading of the court, such a variety of moves, and his stats really showed it. He's shooting almost 50% from the field, high 30s from 3, which is only on 2.5 attempts a game. So I think one of the criticisms is that he really does need to take more threes, help his team out, space the floor a bit. But, it's pretty good. In comparison to, let's say, Trae Young, he was worse offensively, according to Box Plus Minus, but a lot better defensively. So very well-rounded, obviously talented offensively, and obviously still needs to work on defense. But I think pretty fucking good.
Audacious is the word that I think best describes him. Like, even in the first few games of the season, he's blocking Kyrie Irving on the last second shot and then scoring over him too. Like, that's just so impressive for a guy that just got into the league.
Not only is he audacious, but I would say he plays a little bit too dangerously.
Yeah.
Just yesterday, I just saw him do a dunk where he almost broke his elbow on the way down. He needs to learn how to land. Back up that audacity with some good technique, and you'll have a long NBA career that's very successful. Mess around and try to be flashy and cool when you land, and you're going to tear your ACL in your 4th year in the league, and it's going to take your career off the rails. So please, Ja, if you're listening to this, please learn how to land, because I want to keep watching you play for a very long time.
No, that's a good point. I mean, sometimes when he lands, you get Derrick Rose flashbacks of how he used to land when he first came into the league and would be lock-kneed when he landed. That's just terrible on your knees. So hopefully he changes that. Do you want to just run down some of these play type numbers you have for him? Maybe just go over the percentiles?
Yeah, just to quickly go through it, I think you'll see that he's very proficient in a variety of plays without necessarily being amazing at any single one of them. 41st percentile in ISO, which is okay, on 8.5% of his plays. In transition, which are 16% of his plays, which is a lot, he's in the 57th percentile. Or, if you actually count assists with that, he jumps up to the 90th percentile.
We're not subscribed to Synergy, so I actually stole that one from the Dunked On podcast. But I do think that if we were able to add assist numbers to even some of these other play types, like isolation and pick and roll, these seemingly mediocre 40s to 60s percentile efficiency numbers would skyrocket for him. Wouldn't you say so?
Definitely, yeah. Out of the pick and roll, which comprises a full half of his plays, according to NBA.com, he's only 58th percentile, but I can't imagine if you counted passing out to Jaren Jackson or, Jonas Valanciunas for a pick and pop, that would still be the case.
Right.
It's actually very good spotting up, 84th percentile, which makes you think, do they need a second playmaker, like Justice Winslow, perhaps, that can help him play off ball and allow him to get easy scoring opportunities, especially if he is in reality a 36% three-point shooter? That's pretty good. His handoff stats, around 50%, around 40% on cuts. You'd like to see that improve.
And just to let everyone know what these percentiles mean, that's just where he lands in terms of his efficiency compared with other players in the league running those play types.
Exactly. So off a cut, he's in the 40th percentile. That basically just means that he's better than 40% of players in the NBA at that. Off screens, he's only 30%. You'd definitely like to see that improve. Putbacks, 93%. Pretty good for a guard. Can't imagine improving that much more. But he needs to improve in the pick and roll. Even if we can guess that with synergy numbers, that the numbers are better than we look at, he still needs to get better at that, especially if he's going to spend half his time playing in that role. You look at a lot of the younger guards, like D'Angelo Russell last year, for example, was in the 67th percentile, not counting assists in the pick and roll already, and he was doing a similar percentage of his plays. So you'd definitely like to see the efficiency on those improve if you want to continue using them so much.
Right. I mean, it would just be a shame to have a guard with the vision and hops of Ja Morant and not run him through the pick and roll more than he's been doing so far, right? Like, that should be the Grizzlies' offense, ideally, is to run pick and roll with him and Jonas Valanciunas and Jaren Jackson, right? But, so speaking of pick and rolls, we can't talk about a pick and roll without mentioning the roll man. So let's talk about maybe Jaren Jackson a little bit.
Yeah, who is younger than Ja, even though this is his second year in the league, which I thought was shocking. I think he's like 30 days younger or something.
It's so wild, man.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just forget how young these guys are,
Yeah.
Yeah, so super young too. Turned himself really into a prolific three-point shooter this year. 39.7% on threes and shooting over 6 threes a game. That's a lot, especially for a big man.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think his defense, you'd expect something better from a big man with a 7'5" wingspan. Offensively, he's very capable. Defensively, he still has a long way to go. I know that he's one of the worst fouling big men in the league, if not just players in general.
Yeah, but just real fast, wanted to mention that 40% three-point shooting, it really opens up a whole bunch of different play types for him. Without getting too into the details of different play types here, he's basically in the 70th percentile on everything. Pick and roll, roll man, spot up, handoffs 92%, transition buckets. I mean, it's just like the guy can do it all.
Yeah, pretty much the only things he can't do, which shouldn't come as a surprise if you've watched enough of his play, is posting up and playing off screens, which, he's such a gifted offensive mind that I have no doubt that post-ups will either become extinct from his game or he'll improve on them enough to make them passable. Everything else, he was even almost in the 80th percentile as the ball handler in the pick and roll. on one of 50 of his plays, but that's not his job.
Yeah.
To see him be that good at it when you need him to play that role, it's really impressive.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he's just a very creative player, right? And the shooting and the ball handling opens up unorthodox areas of the court for him.
Definitely. What closes off his ceiling, I guess, would be the defense and the rebounding, which aren't that great for a big man.
4.7 rebounds per game, Dimitri.
It's not great.
We looked it up. It's like marginally more than Trae Young, right?
Yeah.
I think Trae Young was 4.3. Can you imagine them scrimmaging each other in the draft and the Hawks being like, yeah, we think Trae's going to be a better rebounder than Jaren. That's our scouting intel.
I would take that bet and I would lose it. But, you can't really expect these things. Yeah, you have a 7'5" wingspan. You're almost 7 feet tall yourself. I don't understand how you wouldn't be getting more rebounds. I think it is a question of reading the ball because he's also, the fouling numbers show this. He jumps for blocks and stuff like that. He gets faked out a lot. I think there's just an issue where he has trouble reading other players' movements on the defensive end, and that's costing him rebounds. It's costing him fouls. It's costing him blocks. All these things which he's getting better at. I saw him get some great blocks the other night, but all places in which he can improve significantly just based on his physical build.
Right. And I mean, you look at the lineup stats, and in lineups where Jackson's on the court, the rebounding is a big issue. They're 26th percentile in offensive rebounding percentage and 47th percentile in opponent's offensive rebounding percentage. So that's really bad. Defense is pretty bad too, 35th percentile. Where things get really worrisome are the Jaren Jackson at center lineups, where they're 7th percentile in offensive rebounding and 12th percentile in opponent's offensive rebounding. So, I mean, that's something you're really going to have to look at if you're the front office of the Grizzlies. Is it sustainable for him to play center for the team long term?
Yeah, especially in a starting capacity. I think off the bench or with the bench unit, let's say, there are times in which they can make it work. It's just you can't rely on it necessarily because you are going to have those defensive and rebounding issues and gaps, especially with the roster construction that the Grizzlies have. Let's get into Jonas Valanciunas, for example. Valanciunas is their best rebounder by far. So I think he kind of provides a counterpoint to Jaren Jackson where he's a solid defender and he's probably the only guy on the team that can provide a mentorship role on that end. I think maybe Jay Crowder did while he was there, but
he's not quite a MILF, but he's transitioning to that point in his porn career.
Definitely. He's starting to turn into a silver fox. He's got a couple of gray hairs, he's getting into that point, but he's not there yet. But as opposed to Jaren Jackson, he's really good at rebounding. And in fact, the Grizzlies are 12th in offensive rebounding percentage and 13th in defensive rebounding percentage in the league. And I think he's probably the main reason why. He was 16th in the league in terms of offensive rebounding percentage and 6th in defensive rebounding among players with more than 500 minutes. And that's really solid. In addition to that, he's very efficient. So you can use him on the offensive end without gritting your teeth, right? He's got 63% true shooting, which is solid. I mean, big men should generally have good true shooting because they're existing around the rim. But he adds a solid three-point shot to his arsenal as well. He's a 37% shooter from there, which makes you have to respect the pick-and-pop potential when he's playing with Ja, for example.
Right. I mean, I don't think he's the long-term answer to stay at the 5. You've got to figure out some way to make Jackson work there. But he definitely played a really big role for this team. On the other side of the front court, there's Brandon Clark, who I think exceeded all expectations.
Summer League MVP last year.
Yeah, I forgot about that. That's very true. Shot 62.3% from the field this year. Unreal. 40.4% from 3 on limited attempts. And 78.5% free throw.
If you don't want to do the math, that adds up to 65% effective field goal percentage and a 67% true shooting percentage, which are both outstanding numbers.
Yeah, I mean, that would lead the league some years.
And these splits came on 12 points and 6 rebounds, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the advanced stats show him to be an amazing player. So maybe take it with a grain of salt, right? This is a big man rookie who's playing limited minutes, taking limited attempts, might not actually be as efficient as he looks. the same time, you look at his 3.5 box plus minus, that's the highest box plus minus among all rookies that played a decent amount of minutes this year. Better than Zion, definitely better than Ja, and better than everyone else.
It's nuts. It's nuts. He was so good. He's probably the consensus number 2 for Rookie of the Year.
Him and Kendrick Nunn, I think, will be duking it out. But, if you take Zion out because of the limited amount of games, he was easily one of the best. And the only sad part about it is that with Valanciunas and Jaren Jackson starting at the 4 and 5, it's not often that you'll see him starting, at least as the team is composed right now, right? But he's the perfect bench player because he energizes the scoring. He's passable on defense, at least, and he doesn't really have too many huge flaws in his game that would leave the bench vulnerable.
Right. And, you can see that in the lineup numbers, right? You look at lineups where Clark's playing the 4 and Jackson's playing the 5, and they're really good, right? Like, we found this lineup of basically the bench lineup with Jackson as the holdover starter at the center.
Right, so that's Tyus Jones, DeAnthony Melton, and Kyle Anderson with Brandon Clark and Jaren Jackson.
Yeah, plus 40 over 48 minutes.
It's insane. Some of the numbers here, you look at them and you think there might have been a typo because their effective field goal percentage was almost 12% better than their opponents with them on the court. And this is primarily due to the fact that their three-point percentage was 8% better than their opponents on 11 more attempts than their opponents. Like, to add that much volume and do it so efficiently, it's really, really nice. And what really surprised me about this lineup, actually, was their rebounding was amazing. Their offensive rebounding percentage was 28%, which is better than the best in the league. Guess who? New York Knicks. But their defensive rebounding percentage was 81.5%, which is only 0.2% behind Milwaukee, who's the best in the league. That's amazing, especially for a lineup that doesn't have a clear, obvious, good rebounder. I'm really shocked by that. I think it's unsustainable because also they had 14 more assists per 100 possessions than their opponents. So some of these numbers, I think small sample size contributes to it, but it's really promising to see that and to see Jaren Jackson playing so well with the staggered minutes as the bench kind of starts swapping in for the starters. And one of the guys from that lineup, DeAnthony Melton, was easily one of the more unexpected stories of the season. This guy is basically residue from a trade.
Residue.
He's residue. He's leftovers. Phoenix was like, you take him. Oh, no. You take him. But this is like a guy who's 6'0" basically, and he's one of the best defenders on the team, right? He's getting almost 2.3 steals per 36, which is equivalent to a 3% steal percentage. Just to put that into context, Marcus Smart led the league in steal percentage in 2019 at 3.1%. A very talented defensive player, especially in terms of steals, right? Obviously, defense is more than that. A lot of it comes down to the way that he plays on the court, the feistiness, just the energy that he brings on that end, which not a lot of Grizzlies players do, so it makes it even more outstanding.
The big question with him is offensively, can he hit jump shots, right? He shot, I think, 30% from 3 this year.
Yeah.
It's not great. I will say when you watch the tape on him, he's quick triggered. He doesn't look like he's afraid to shoot, which I think is promising.
And just to touch on a few of the other players that are in their roster that are more important for them, we have Dillon Brooks, who's solid for them, just fairly inefficient.
Dillon Brooks, though, he's got the opposite issue. He needs to not shoot as much.
Yeah.
He's too quick triggered.
He's really one of those players that eye test wise looks like a good player, but then you dig deep into his stats and you see he's really not that good. But just so we get out of the way, he was extended at the trade deadline for 3 years, so clearly the Grizzlies saw something in him and they like what he brings to the team. And I think he has a really nice floater, like basically all of the Grizzlies players somehow, which is promising in terms of how is the mid-range going to look in the future. They're already on top of that. They have a bunch of guys that can really capably play from almost any range. They have an answer for everything, right?
Right.
Similarly, you have Kyle Anderson, aka Slow-Mo, one of my favorite nicknames in the league. And then you have Tyus Jones, who had an amazing year, 46% from the field, 38% from 3. His assist-to-turnover ratio was 5.2, which is obviously unsustainable on more volume, but worth noting. And then you had Jay Crowder and Solomon Hill before the trade. The Grizzlies made them look pretty good. And it was actually kind of sad to see them go because some of their best lineups included these guys.
Yeah, those guys became really important, especially Dillon Brooks, Kyle Anderson, and Melton, when they traded away Jay Crowder and Solomon Hill in the Iguodala trade. So let's just get into that really fast. They trade away Hill, Crowder, and Iguodala for Dion Waiters, who was waived, Justice Winslow, and Gorgie Jing.
Why do you think they waived Dion Waiters?
My sources tell me that he had a weed freak out on the jet that was taking him to Memphis.
Just to touch on that, I do think that waiving him, I mean, I understand why they did it. This is like a guy who clearly has culture issues that you're introducing to a team composed of dudes that are like 20 years old. But he's a really good hustle player, and the Lakers think he's good enough. And he's a $12 million cap hit. I understand why they waived him. I wonder if it was the right decision. I suspect it is. But at the same time, he's not as bad as people say he is. He just had some issues this year.
It's the right decision.
Yeah. The biggest, I think, piece of that trade, though, was adding Justice Winslow. He's only 24, so he fits more or less with the timeline and is known as a larger player, but being a good playmaker out of that. And Miami, I think, used him a lot as their primary playmaker in certain lineups last year. This year, he got injured early on after a pretty bad start, and he's gotten injured again in the bubble. So who knows what his future is like. But in theory, he's a really good fit to add next to Ja to allow him to play a little bit more off ball, not have to dominate the ball as much, and kind of learn better how to play in terms of a team offense.
For sure. I mean, the big question for the Grizzlies going forward is you've got your franchise guys at both of the polar ends of the roster, right? You've got your center and you've got your point guard. How are they going to fill in the middle of the roster, right? I'm still not totally sold on Dillon Brooks. The guy shoots threes like he's the best shooter in the world, but still only shoots them at 36% clip.
The guy will play with heart, but he won't always make a shot.
Dude, his usage is as much as Ja Morant.
Yeah, that's
crazy.
Yeah, Dylan, sorry, you gotta fix that, man. I know we're all confident in you, we're all happy for you, but that's a little bit ridiculous. And just to finish off that trade, just to make a note of it, Gorgie Jang they got for free. So don't say no to that. The guy's not great, but he's a good spot-up shooter at the center position. He adds size, like, whatever. This was, I think, a hot take. Josh Jackson. You see a glimmer of hope?
Yeah, he had a pretty good year. The Grizzlies sent him to the D-League for the first 3 quarters of the season or so. Clearly they wanted to iron out the kinks, all of the bad things that he had learned in Phoenix.
Bad things.
Bad things. But he came back into the lineup and played about 21.2 minutes per game in the last 12 games. Scored 12.5 points, 47% from the field, 36.4 from 3. And you got to respect a guy that's career hit rock bottom and was able to kind of crawl back out of that.
And if you actually convert those stats to per 36 numbers, he was scoring 21 points, getting 5 rebounds, and 4 assists a game. So, Josh Jackson All-Star year coming?
I don't know about that, but Josh Jackson as a solid role player, shooting 47% from the field and 36 from 3, and playing solid D, I'm all in on that. I'd love to have that player.
Definitely. And then just to finish up what they did around the trade deadline, they got rid of Bruno Caboclo and got a second-round pick and Jordan Bell, who they didn't really play. Again, building assets.
Right.
This is something that you don't often see these, let's be honest, shitty small market franchises, which is what everyone expected the Grizzlies to be. You don't see them doing that. You see them being reckless with their assets. These guys are getting rid of essentially ballast and getting really good stuff in return. So let's just talk about lineups for a bit. I think Jenkins is really interesting because unlike some more old school coaches like Tom Thibodeau, for example, his minutes distribution among his players is freakily balanced. It's like he used a calculator to calculate it. Like John Morant played more minutes than anybody else per game, and he only had 30 minutes a game. If
you look at any of the Budenholzer teams, they experiment with different lineups, right? You see a lot of different lineups with, 100 minutes played or 100 possessions played. They're trying to figure out what sort of stuff works, right? Which lineups have good chemistry.
So I guess we can call this a tale of 2 lineups. Basically, there are 2 starting lineups after they traded away Jay Crowder and all those other people. So let's start with the first one. You have probably the more standard one is Ja Morant, Dillon Brooks, Kyle Anderson, Jaren Jackson, and Valanciunas, who played really only 126 minutes together, not that long, but they were minus 11 over that time. And you'd be really surprised to find out they took 12 fewer three-point attempts per 100 possessions, and their three-point percentage was almost 16% worse than their opponents with Jaren Jackson out there. Their rebounding numbers there were pretty good, equivalent to Philadelphia's at 80.3%, but their offensive rebounding, like we talked about with lineups with Jackson, was equivalent to 24th place in the league, which would be the Warriors, at 21.5%. It's a little disappointing to see.
I mean, you wonder if just having Anderson in there muddles the three-point shooting enough that it's just hard to score with that lineup. Like, replacing him with somebody who maybe is quicker and a little bit rangier.
Brandon Clark, perhaps?
Brandon Clark, maybe Melton. I think the Clark lineups that might just be a little bit too big with Clark, Jackson, and Valanciunas out there. I just don't see Anderson starting coming out of the bubble. I think, if anything, we're going to see Melton at the 2. I've heard that Grayson Allen might play some, which would make sense if his theoretical three-point shooting comes to fruition.
And if he's not going to be an asshole, and he likes to trip people, right? That's his thing. Yeah, so that's one lineup. Now here's another one. This one sounds like it would be worse, right? You swap out Jaren Jackson, you basically move Dylan Brooks up to the 3, Anderson up to the 4, and then you put in Melton. And then all of a sudden, you have Melton, Anderson, Valanciunas out there. That's a really good defensive lineup. What I thought was really interesting about this, especially with Valanciunas out there, their offensive rebounding skyrockets. They become 7% better than the New York Knicks, who are the best in the league, like we said. And their defensive rebounding percentage just bottoms out. And it's worse than the worst in the league Hornets by almost half a percentage point.
They started this lineup when Jaren Jackson went down with his late game injury. So I don't know if we're going to see this as a starting lineup going into the bubble. I think we're probably going to see the Jackson-Valanciunas front court. But it does beg the interesting question of what is the bench lineup going to be like.
Just for posterity, let's say, this lineup was plus 8.5 over almost as many minutes as the other one.
Yeah.
So it's a plus 19 swing. This is significant, right?
Right. It's a very good lineup. And look, you're going to have either Jackson or Ja Morant as a holdover starter on at least the first bench unit in the first quarter, right? There are two answers to the question of which lineup is going to be that holdover lineup, right? It's either going to be this one with Valanciunas or the Jackson and the bench mob with Brandon Clark.
Yeah.
So
and just so no one gets the idea that we don't like Jaren Jackson, let's look at the numbers here. Games in which this lineup played, the Grizzlies only went 5-4, whereas the other lineup, they went 10-4. So Jaren Jackson is very important for them. It's just that lineup didn't work for him. And clearly they have ways of using him that are very effective. And this lineup, even if it's good, doesn't necessarily mean that the team will be good if you have to work around not having your number 2 guy out there. So I think Jaren Jackson is still going to be a very important piece for them. And I think Taylor Jenkins is perfectly capable of figuring out which lineups work, which ones don't. You know, it's all a learning experience. And what better learning experience than to be locked in Orlando at Disney World for a month with all your best friends, right? So let's talk about the bubble. Justice Winslow is not going to be there because of a hip injury. I actually thought Grayson Allen was out for the season with a hip injury, but I saw him playing the other day.
Yeah, so he looks like he's going to play. All indications are he's going to be a rotation player. So we'll see how that goes. Just expectations going into the bubble. I think we need to wrap up Memphis. Look, so they have a 3-game lead going into the bubble, and the next team has to get within 4 games to get into the play-in tournament. They're almost guaranteed to make it into the play-in tournament, so who is going to challenge them in the tournament? I think after the Blazers-Pelicans podcast, there's a consensus between us that it's going to be one of those 2 teams.
Yeah.
And who do the Grizzlies want to play between them? I think the scarier team is probably the Pelicans, because I just don't think that they match up well against the Pelicans at all, especially defensively. Like, Jackson is not equipped to guard Zion Williamson. And Dylan Brooks, I think he's actually an underrated defender. He's really chippy. He's not equipped to guard Brandon Ingram. It's a lot of weird matchups, and on the other side of the ball, I think they've got a lot of guys they can throw at Ja Morant. A lot of guys that can minimize the impact of Valanciunas and Jaren Jackson. It just seems like a really bad matchup for them.
Definitely. I mean, no matter who wins, I don't think anyone's really expected to beat the Lakers. It would just be nice for the Grizzlies to get some playoff reps, so that in the future they come more prepared, whichever seeding position they come into next year, the year after that. So they're really in a winning position no matter what happens. They're not expected to steal the first round or anything crazy like that. So, as much pressure as there is on them, it could be a lot worse. I think this is a really great position to be in as a team in the first year of a rebuild.
The future for the Grizzlies is super bright. The bubble needs to be looked at, like you said, as a way of getting more experience, right? All of their moves have been to acquire assets, to expand on those young assets, young players.
There's a lot of questions that'll be answered about Taylor Jenkins' coaching ability and John Morant's playing style, especially next to Jaren Jackson, where they haven't always been the strongest this season. But I think there's so many good, talented young players on this team and so many interesting fits that they're about in as good of a position as you can hope for such a young team with nothing proven yet. But I'm hoping that'll change in the future. And John Morant definitely has a bright future ahead of him. Jaren Jackson has a bright future ahead of them. I'm a Grizzlies fan. Let's admit it.
Yeah, man. I mean, they were one of the league pass darlings of this year. Everyone loves watching them, so we are excited to check them out again.
But after the break, we will come to a team that some people might find even more exciting because they actually have a chance of making a good playoff run. All right, stick around. See you soon.
We are back.
Well, let's start with the Dallas Mavericks, why don't we? All right, well, this is going to be a little bit easier to talk about because they didn't really have as much going on in the preseason. The draft, basically, just know that Detroit got swindled and traded 3 second-rounders for Dallas's early second-rounder.
Right, and I mean, the reason they don't have the first-round pick this year is they traded their first-round pick last year to move up to draft Luka Doncic.
Good trade.
Yeah.
I mean, he's
I don't want to talk about that trade.
So let's talk about free agency, right? They basically, if you had to summarize their free agency, it would be signing a ton of really solid role players to multi-year contracts with the express purpose of building a team around Luka Doncic that will be locked in for the next few years, which is very smart. So you have Dwight Powell, who gets extended for 3 years, $33 million. Great rim runner, great synergy with Luka Doncic. Seth Curry, 4 years, $32 million. Great value for a guy who is now the second best career all-time three-point shooter. They re-signed Maxi Kleber, 4 years, $36 million. He's he's not the same kind of rim runner as Dwight Powell, but he's really good at shooting threes, which is a good second option. And he's become more and more specialized and now takes over 60% of his shots from three.
Kleber has to take 100% of his shots, either as threes or dunks.
And if you shoot 37.5% from three, that's often going to be the better option, especially if you're Maxi Kleber and you don't have the bounciness of someone like Powell, right? Dorian Finney-Smith, they re-signed for 3 years, $12 million. Nothing too flashy, but he's gotten better for them every year, and he's pretty good at getting assists for Luka Doncic. The big story was Porzingis, who they maxed to a 5-year, $158 million deal. The last year is a player option. After taking the risk of trading with the Knicks for him during his recovery year, they also got Tim Hardaway Jr. in that trade, which was a very underrated addition. And, I mean, what more can we say about him? He's basically their second option now. He's huge, he's rangy, he's a unicorn. That's what people say, right? He's a big that can really space the floor. He has deep range, and teams will have to learn how to play with that.
Right. I mean, if Porzingis came back as the same player that he was in 17-18, then I think that max would be deserved. Going into the trade, though, the question was, is he going to be able to overcome this ACL injury, right? Those injuries are very hard to come back from. So, to be determined. I will say he originally said he was going to sign his qualifying offer when Dallas traded for him.
Tisk, tisk.
And absolutely no one believed that. So,
just to round out their free agency, they got Boban Marjanovic, maybe the most memed NBA player. He's just a massive guy, 2 years, $7 million. He can put in like 10 minutes every couple of games. And then, as we said earlier, DeLon Wright came to the team in exchange for 2 second-rounders on a 3-year, $28 million deal. And he's probably one of the better all-around bench guards in the league. Really efficient, good defender. Really a great signing for Dallas, I think.
All of these signings look really good in the micro level, but on the macro level, when you zoom out and look at their cap space for the next 5 years, it is all filled. I mean, all of these guys were signed on 3 or 4 year deals, and they don't seem to make a lot of money on their own, but it is going to be a crippling cap situation for them for the next 3 or 4 years. This is their team.
Yeah, they're pretty much stuck with it unless they can figure out a creative way to make a trade. But
which is hard to do because they're out 2 first-round picks from the Porzingis trade. They were out their pick this year in the Luka Doncic trade. They don't have a lot of assets going forward.
But in exchange, they get a roster that's custom built for Luka Doncic's vision, for his offensive style, filled with awesome three-point shooters. Very, very solid all around. And they have a couple good rim runners. You know, they have a lot of options to pass to. And I think everyone, as we'll get into later, had amazing years. Is this because of Luka Doncic, perhaps?
Right. So I think going into the season, you're asking yourself, okay, we've created a roster that's tailor-made for Luka Doncic, right? It's got so many weapons for him to use. How good is Luka going to be this year? He was amazing as a rookie. Is he going to be able to expand on that significantly?
He wouldn't be an MVP candidate. No one was expecting that.
No, of course not.
The other big question, right, was as you said, the Porzingis injury. He hadn't played since February 2018 after an ACL tear. He's a big guy, you know, that's really kind of, in terms of injuries, usually the bigger you are, the worse every injury is. It kind of compounds a lot worse. So it was a big risk to max him and use that much cap space. But I think Dallas must have seen what they wanted to see to feel confident to make that move when they did.
Right, so the question with him is he going to come back as the player he was before? And going into the season, Vegas and SB Nation had them as a 40-42 team. I think the expectation was that they were going to compete for the 8th seed and end up around 500.
538 was a bit more bullish with 45-37 and a 60% chance to make the playoffs.
So the season starts, though, and we'll just talk about their season in broad strokes. So at the end of the season, they were on pace to win 49 games, but they had a point differential of 6.1, which historically has been indicative of a team winning mid-50s, 60 games in a year. It's a very good point differential.
Yeah, and if you look at their net rating over the course of the year and you smooth it out using a moving average, they barely dropped below 0 all year, which means that even if they had losses here and there, they never played that badly multiple games in a row that you'd say that they had any bad stretches, really. Like, yeah, there were a couple stretches that they lost a few, you know, but really, I mean, overall, this was a very consistently good season. And, you know, the only things you can fault are that Luka missed a lot of games and Porzingis was a little rusty, but otherwise really exceeded all expectations, much like Memphis, but to a greater degree.
The difference between them and Memphis is Dallas was spanking bad teams.
Yeah.
They had a really good record against under 500 teams. That helped them take win streaks that maybe should have been smaller and extend on them, right? They had a 10-1 stretch in December, which was basically 2 5-game win streaks bookending a loss. In that stretch, they beat the Lakers, Rockets, and Raptors, but their other 7 wins were just against Eastern Conference doldrums. They beat, I think, Minnesota twice. They're getting the wins that they need to get, right? Which is indicative of a really good team.
Yeah, I mean, and like you said earlier, against under 500 teams, they won 30 and only lost 11 games against those kinds of teams, which is absurdly good. And a lot of those losses that prevented their record from being higher in the conferences, really you could chalk up to these flip-a-coin losses, right?
Yeah, the reason they were able to beat these teams that are worse than them so easily is because they had the best offense, not just in the league, but ever in terms of offensive rating, which is points per 100 possessions. This team scored 116.7, almost a full point higher than the 18-19 Warriors with Steph, KD, Draymond, and Clay, right?
Yeah, that's a pretty good team.
Yeah, it's not bad. Not bad to be compared to them.
But what makes their offense so good? Is it Luka's 2020 vision?
If it was possible to expand on his season before, he did it. I mean, he was so good at running the offense. Like you said, the offense is tailored around Luka. They ran a lot more pick and roll, and spotted up shooters around Luka with Seth Curry, Jalen Brunson, Dorian Finney-Smith, Delon Wright, and Tim Hardaway Jr. Capable three-point shooters that can also drive and kick.
And if you want to know how capable we're talking, Seth Curry was in the 98th percentile of spot-up shooters, and his effective field goal percentage on those plays was 71%.
Yeah.
And then you think that's impressive. Tim Hardaway Jr. was in the 96th percentile, and his effective field goal percentage was only 65%. But if your effective field goal percentage is only 65%,
yeah, only.
You gotta,
what?
Yeah, you don't really have issues there, right? It's not an only situation. Those are both historically good spot-up years.
You look at Tim Hardaway's stats in terms of his career, and it really shows you how beneficial it can be to start taking more shots spotting up. In Atlanta and New York, he was taking a lot of shots off the dribble. He was one of the number one options on offense. In Dallas, spotting up around Luka Doncic as a secondary option, I think he's really found his groove. He's now a 40% three-point shooter. That's pretty strong.
The only, I think, downside to their play this season was losing Dwight Powell to a really unfortunate Achilles injury after he had a season of shooting almost 72% from two-point land, which means the rim for Dwight Powell. And that really limits you in terms of your offense because he was their rim runner, right? Like, what do you have now? You have Boban stand next to the rim and be 7.5 feet tall.
We talked about the guys in the backcourt, right? The guys that are spotting up around Luka Doncic. When Luka Doncic either ISOs or does pick and roll, he's also got really talented roll men, right? Mm-hmm. Losing Dwight Powell was tough. Dwight Powell was, in a lot of ways, like one of their best players this year. And if you look at some of the lineup data for him, it's just insane. Like, in all Dwight Powell lineups, he was plus 9.3 in 2,139 possessions, which is a ton. Certain lineups were, like, super strong, too. Like, the starting lineup, Doncic, Hardaway, Finney-Smith, Porzingis, Powell, was plus 12.5 in 400 possessions.
It's pretty good.
Really good.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point that we're basically trying to make is that Luka makes everyone so good in so many ways. So, for example, if we're talking about the backcourt, right, Dallas had more players shoot above 37% from three-point land than below. And those being below were Brunson with 36%, Porzingis with 35%, Luka himself shooting 32% on largely insane unassisted shots, right? And then you have Justin Jackson, Marjanovic, and Dwight Powell who are below 30%. And another way to say this, really, is that Dallas was second in the amount of three-point attempts that they took this season after no points for this, Houston. But they were 8th in three-point percentage, and Houston was only 23rd. Not only are they launching a bunch of three-point attempts, but they're doing it really efficiently, which is a deadly combo and why their offense was so good.
You know a guy is initiating the offense well when the role players around him exceed their expected field goal percentage. Back to the rim runners, though. One of the other ways the floor is spaced out and Luka Doncic is able to run such an efficient offense is because guys like Dwight Powell are rim running. They're dunking. You saw that a little bit with Maxi Kleber. He was able to kind of step into that role. I think he's got more hops than people give him credit for. But he did take, like you said, 60% of his field goals were threes, right? Now, the interesting one is Porzingis, right? When he is playing next to a big man, he's a spot-up shooter like the other two guys. When he's the 5, though, then you go 5 out as three-point shooters. If you run him in the pick and roll, he picks and pops for threes. Or you can just space out the floor for isolation for Luka.
Right, which he's really good at. I mean, he's basically scoring about 1 point per possession, but that's good for 82nd percentile in the league. I mean, that's better than 82% of players. ISOs are very hard plays. So to break even, because 1 point per possession is essentially like average, that's really impressive.
Yeah, it's super strong.
They have to take it seriously. Defenses have to take him very, very seriously.
Yeah, anytime you can get over a point per possession on really any play, that's just a very strong option on offense.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, let's talk a bit about what exactly did Doncic improve upon this year, right? Because his stat line last year was really gaudy. It was He was shooting, 43% from the field, 33% from three. You'd wish for better efficiency, but when you're getting 8 rebounds and 6 assists and still scoring 21 points a game while learning how to run the offense as a rookie, that's very, very impressive.
Yeah, so 19-20, we're looking at 33 minutes per game from Luka Doncic, 46% field goal, 31.8% from three, 9 boards, 8.7 assists, and 28.7 points.
That's almost a triple-double.
That's so much higher. I mean, that's an increase in every single category except for three-point shooting, which goes down 10 percentage points. Goes down 1 percentage point.
Yeah, goes down 1 percentage point and on 2 more attempts a game, which I think if you're doing the math, that much more volume, you can excuse a 1% dip.
Right, and I looked into the difference in three-point shooting this year, trying to figure out why his percentage went down. So his percentage of assisted three-pointers goes down from 42.3% last year to 23.7% this year. That means more of his three-point shooting is coming off the dribble, which essentially means he's taking more step-back threes. And you saw 7.2 pull-up threes, which, if you look at the data on pull-ups versus catch-and-shoot threes, they're way more difficult shots, and guys tend to shoot worse on them. But the impact of having that shot in your arsenal, if you're a pick-and-roll ball handler or an isolation player, is unquantifiable. It opens up so much on the floor in terms of spacing and putting pressure on the defense. Even though his three-point shooting goes down a percentage point, it had a major impact on the offense and was a major reason why their offense was so historic.
Yeah, and if as his defender you weren't fucked enough by his three-point shooting, his shooting at the rim also got a lot better, right? Yep. So from 0 to 5 feet, last year he shot 59%. This year, a massive 10% jump to 69%. And if you reduce that bounds to 0 to 3 feet, so right at the rim, that's up to 75% this year. That's absolute hell on earth if you're trying to defend Luka Doncic, and you don't know what he's going to do. First of all, he has 4 other options on the court of people to pass to.
Highly efficient options, too,
But then he can hit you with a three-pointer. He can go to the rim, and he has one of the best, finishing moves in the game. And then he can also get you from the mid-range with a floater if all else fails, which is probably the least efficient shot in his arsenal, but it's still efficient enough to be deadly.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a great floater game. He finishes really well. I mean, the issue is if you leave him open for three, he nails those at a respectable enough clip that you have to guard him close out there. But if you let him have an uncontested shot at the rim, he's going to nail that too. I mean, his percentages in the 0 to 5 range are like what rim rolling centers who only shoot those shots get.
Pretty much. And I mean, I think all of this is reflected very accurately in an advanced stat like box plus minus, especially for someone like Luka, where so much of his impact does show up in the box score. There's some players you can argue a lot of their impact doesn't show up, maybe mainly defensive players. But for him, he's at 8.4 total BPM this year, which is MVPs have been won with a lot less than that. In certain years, that would be an MVP season. Obviously, this year we have some really outstanding play from so many different players. What's even more impressive, I think, is that his defensive box plus minus is 1.1. But 1.1 defensive box plus minus for a guard that's running your entire offense and putting in so much energy there, now that's scary.
That was really surprising to me because I consider him just kind of a net neutral on defense. He's not bad, but he's not good. He's still a little slow-footed. But yeah, look, BPM overall is like really high. I mean, that's like an MVP season.
So let's talk about his second-hand man, Kristaps Porzingis, who I think had on and off disappointing but very promising season, especially when you look near the end of it. In the beginning of the season, he had really lackluster efficiency, and there was a lot of rust accumulation over that however many months that he didn't play. But still, you're getting 19 points, 9 rebounds a game. That's not bad for your second option when Luka's usage is something around 45%, right?
Yeah, for sure. The issue with Porzingis is after being out for so long, I think we all kind of forgot how he played. we expected him to play more like a big bruising power forward because he's 7'3" and he came back from that long hiatus looking like fucking Dolph Lundgren and Rocky. I mean, the guy...
Did he say that he was going to break you?
Like, he not only got the haircut, but he bulked up and gained what? He looks like he gained 40 pounds of muscle.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like, since his Knicks years. But the issue, and I think Dallas looked at him and was like, yeah, we should be posting this guy up a lot. The issue is he was in the 20th percentile on post-ups, and it was 13% of his plays. That's really not good.
When you're getting 0.8 points per post-up possession, that's a lot of P's, that's not good. That's a glaring vulnerability that opposing defenses will exploit. Watching your film, knowing your tendencies, and not knowing what your weaknesses are, and playing this so many times, part of the issue is that he avoids contact.
Yeah, right. I mean, look, you can understand how Rick Carlisle would look at him and be like, look, we need to be posting Porzingis up a few times a game. Because he's naturally going to get smaller guys switched onto him. The issue is he doesn't look comfortable posting up and banging with big guys, and he also doesn't look comfortable posting up on small guys. It almost looks like he has, like, a funny spot in his pelvis where, like, small guys maybe, like, tickle it or something.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, you spring a feather, hide it in your basketball shorts. But I think not only just looking at post-ups, but a stat that I won't take credit for finding this. I'm pretty sure I listened to or read something where they brought this up. But you can look at his efficiency fall in real time as he takes dribbles, right?
Yeah.
So after 0 to 1 dribbles, totally fine. He's about 45%. In fact, a lot of his shots come after just getting past the ball, not dribbling and shooting it off. The problem is, if you have him in the post, just pounding the rock for 3 to 6 dribbles, or more than that, his efficiency drops to 24%. It's horrible. Like, that's never an acceptable number that you want to see, especially from a guy that's 7 feet tall, being switched on to small defenders. It's almost hard to believe that it's real, but at the same time, I do want to make the point that if you're Dallas, every time that a player other than Luka Doncic is dribbling the ball, that's not an ideal situation.
Yeah, I think the most frustrating thing about Porzingis is his go-to move is, I'm 7'3" and I'm just going to shoot over you. Like, there's so many times where he faces up against his defender, does a couple ball fakes, and then just jumps up and takes a contested jump shot.
Right.
And he's actually pretty good at that. Like, I think those shots would be calculated in the 45% on 0 to 1 dribbles.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's just when he needs to make his own shot, when he's in the block or something like that. It's not necessarily the best way to play him.
It also puts the coach in a weird position where if you're a coach, you don't look at those shots and think, that's the most effective way to use my guy. You look at those shots and think, we can probably get more movement out of this guy to get a less contested shot, you know? It's weird to, like, succumb to shooting those shots.
I agree. But despite the drawbacks that we may have seen this season, I think overall, you know, if you look at his counting stats, you look at his advanced stats where his win shares per 48 is 0.13, which is respectable. His box plus minus is 1.5. That indicates a net positive on the team. A 1.5, people have made the All-Star game with a BPM of 1.5. Now,
people that shouldn't have.
If he was in the East, he would have probably made the All-Star game this year, let's be honest.
Yeah, you're definitely not making it in the West with 1.5.
No, but that plus this, like, unicorn quality, this freakish range, I think even if he doesn't improve too much from this point, you'd be disappointed, obviously. But I think Carlisle and Doncic could still make it work. You don't want a max player to be playing with that level of production. There are worse deals out in the league right now. There are a lot of them.
Yeah, I mean, we harped on the inability to be physical. I think one way that Porzingis showed some promise in the physicality department is by increasing his rebounding totals, right? He looked a little more comfortable than he did in New York. His numbers were up. I think he averaged, like 6-ish rebounds in his days in New York.
Yeah.
Those went up to around 9. That's something to be excited about if you're a Mavs fan. I think the big thing with Porzingis, though, was later in the season he switched to center.
Right.
And in those games, he played really well. In the last 10 games of the season, he scored 23.4 points, 11 boards, and 3 blocks per game, and they won 7 of those 10 games. Overall, the team was plus 6.8 per 100 possessions at center in 2,216 possessions. And some of the lineups were absolutely insane, right? Curry, Hardaway, Doncic, Finney-Smith, and Porzingis, a lineup that started a lot of games at the end of the season, was plus 13.6 in 259 possessions, 123.6 points per 100 possessions on offense, 88th percentile, 110 points per 100 possessions on defense, which would have been 46th percentile.
And even when they switched out Finney-Smith for Kleber, that was even better, right? So that was plus 21 in 109 possessions, and their offense went even higher, but where you saw the real improvements was their defense got 6 points per 100 better.
Yeah.
So there are so many ways in which they can use him, and as much as the Dwight Powell loss sucks, the fact that Porzingis was able to come into his own as a center is maybe the silver lining on the cloud there.
Well, just to sort of like wrap up these lineups, I think the most surprising thing about these lineups is that the lineups were good on defense, or at least passable on defense with him at center. I was worried about him being able to take the impact of bumping against big centers that are physical in the rebounds, physical maybe posting him up, and it looked like he took that challenge.
Yeah, like you said, very surprising when you look at his tendencies on offense. The fact that he was able to switch to defense and work past those things is very impressive.
The other surprising factor for him was opponents only shot 57.6% at the rim when he was playing center, which would have been 11th among players to see 10 shots at the rim. The stat looks like it would be a really high field goal percentage, but you've got to realize that when people get within 0 to 5 feet of the rim, it's just very easy to score.
Yeah, unless you have someone to swat it away, of course, right?
Right.
Good for them. But yeah, I mean, I think the funny thing about Dallas is that their other starters, while they have some interesting qualities, I think more interesting is their bench, because the bench asks the question, what do we do when Luka is not on the court?
Mm-hmm.
So they have the 5th highest net rating among all benches in the league with plus 2.4. Pretty good. Jalen Brunson is a really solid...
I love that guy.
Oh, he's great.
He's
great.
So good.
He has such a good style. He's an amazing ball handler. You know, he's no Luka, but he's solid. He's really better than his stats indicate. I think that you did see some of his limitations, like in the game where the Raptors came back from being down 30 and Jalen Brunson had to kind of assume control over the team. You saw the limitations that will keep him on the bench in lieu of Luka. But at the same time, the fact that the bench is so good, I think that's very promising. And I think he is seen as kind of, if not a long-term solution, at least a really workable one for the time being.
Well, I mean, he's a perfect backup point guard, right? With the backup point guard, you want a guy that's going to be able to shoot a little bit off the dribble, score a little bit, but more importantly, set up your offense and get the ball to the guys that need it.
Yeah.
He's just a very good floor general. I think his limitations on defense are going to be hard to overcome with those tiny little T-Rex arms that he has. But, you know, he was a second-round pick, and people in the second round are second-rounders because they have limitations, right?
Yeah. So another player that they have in their second unit is DeLon Wright, who's, again, like we said earlier, very well-rounded, right? He's a combo guard that can both play off-ball or create a shot when need be. His efficiency this year was outstanding. A really good pickup for them, and I think was a very auspicious decision for the Mavericks to do the sign and trade.
To be honest, I thought he was going to start more.
Yeah.
I thought he was going to be the starting 2 guard next to Luka.
He's good enough to do it.
Yeah, I mean, you look at DeLon Wright, and we all know he's an amazing defender. If you look at his defensive box plus minus, he's got a 2, which is insane for a backcourt player. And he's shooting 39% from 3. It's like, that guy just seems like he's perfect to play next to Luka. He can take the defensive assignments that would be more difficult for Luka. Guys like Damian Lillard, Steph Curry, the smaller, quicker, rangier point guards. And then he can just spot up around Luka, maybe take some ball handling duty from time to time.
Well, I mean, when it's between him, Seth Curry, and Tim Hardaway Jr., one's got to go, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised.
It's quite a rotation, though.
For sure. If Seth Curry or Tim Hardaway Jr. get injured, he's a perfectly good replacement for one of them in a starting lineup. Again, they have him for 3 years. So even if he doesn't work out for whatever reason, he's got a very tradable contract. These two teams, Dallas and Memphis, they're making the right moves. That's why it's so easy to talk about these teams, because they're very good, very fast, in a very unexpected way. But if you actually look at what they were doing, you could have seen this coming almost.
Yeah, you can see the plan.
Yeah.
Right? You can see the decisions that were made that led to this point and that they paid off, right?
Yeah. And so we won't talk more about Maxi Kleber, but again, another really good person that will spend most of his time coming off the bench, but a third of his games were starts this season.
Yeah.
So he can start if you need him to. At the same time, his kind of defensive issues, if he's playing the 5 against particular centers, are going to be tough.
The tape showed Porzingis guarding the opponent's center in the matchups where Maxi Kleber started. I mean, I think that in some cases you're going to put Kleber on the opposing center just to take the brunt of maybe a heavy post-up player, someone that's going to wear Porzingis down on offense. But, yeah, I mean, Kleber was an awesome player.
And then just so we get them out of the way, Boban and Barea.
The meme team.
The meme team. It's just really funny to have them both on the same team.
Yeah, it's sort of like when Muggsy Bogues and Manute Bol were on the same team in Houston.
And they're both, they're both MILFs. They're both doing them. They're both Cougars. They're coming out there. They're in their 30s. They're like, hello, boys. We're going to show you what we're made of. Barea is like the little energetic guy that is still somehow really good after suffering an Achilles tear. And Boban, well, we all just have a smile on our faces when Boban's, comes out on the court.
Yeah, I guess we should just very quickly mention the one trade they did, which was not a good move.
No.
So they traded 1 second-round pick for Willie Cauley-Stein. I think that was to shore up the center rotation after losing Dwight Powell. The issue is Willie Cauley-Stein was terrible for them. Maxi Kleber started playing a lot better. And by the end of the season, Willie Cauley-Stein was getting DNPs. So I don't think that's really anything that we should be worried about going into the bubble, especially because he didn't even come.
Yeah, so let's just talk about the bubble. Players that they will not have, obviously Dwight Powell due to an Achilles tear. Jalen Brunson, who had shoulder surgery earlier in the year. Willie Cauley-Stein, he's having a child. Congratulations. And Courtney Lee, it's not clear whether or not he'll be playing due to a calf injury. None of these, aside from Jalen Brunson, are really anything that you're going to lose sleep over. Like with Dwight Powell, obviously that's a huge loss, but they've figured out a way around it. Jalen Brunson, I guess DeLon Wright's going to be playing more minutes running the offense in the second unit. Again, like we said, DeLon Wright is very capable. They have so many guys they can swap in and out seamlessly without sacrificing too much production.
Right, and they're deep.
Yeah.
I think they've got a solid 8-man rotation, and if any of those guys get the Rona or have an injury, they've got a couple guys behind them that can play minutes on a good team. I like Dallas because they have a very clear identity, and all of their players play a really important role. Like with some of these teams, you're like, oh, okay, with Memphis, Josh Jackson could fill in, and he played okay, but you don't really know exactly what he's going to be doing on offense or defense. With Dallas, you do. You just know where everyone is supposed to be and what they're supposed to be doing.
I think we see a difference between the two teams where I think Memphis outperformed their stats this year in the standings, whereas Dallas underperformed them. Dallas really looks like they could be a top 3 seed based on their point differential. Memphis looks like it should be closer to a 9th or 10th seed, but both these teams landed where they did, and they just have to deal with that. I think the fact that Dallas landed at number 7 here is kind of scary for them, because if we talk about expectations in the bubble, Dallas might be one of the teams for whom the first round matchup question is most pertinent. Mm-hmm. Because right now, they're set to go against the Clippers in the first round, because the Clippers are number 2 and they're number 7. And you might think, okay, well, that's fine. We'll just win enough of our seeding games to get ahead of OKC or Houston, who are tied for, 5th and 6th. Well, the hard thing is that Dallas played 3 more games than either of those teams, and they lost all 3 of them.
Yeah.
So that really does make it a tall order. Obviously, they would rather play against Utah without one of their really good players, Bojan Bogdanovic, or they'd play against Denver, who they beat twice and lost by 1 point the other time this season. Clearly a good matchup for them.
I think that's an underrated playoff seeding narrative in the bubble, right? Because none of those teams want to play the Clippers.
Yeah, I think all those teams are looking at teams like Denver and Utah and saying, okay, these are more vulnerable teams. Yeah. I think Dallas in particular will be looking at that Denver matchup and be salivating.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens. I can't wait to watch more Dallas. They've got the best offense in the league and a superstar. So we wanted to talk about the future with them, but I'm kind of like, fuck the future, dude. This team is so good right now. I think they could actually do something here.
No, I agree. The future for them, I think there's really not much more to say than we've already said. If this is how they're playing their first year as a team together, I think the ceiling is really potentially much higher, although it's hard to come up with a narrative for how that is possible, considering they have the best offense of all time, and the defensive woes won't be solved very easily with the roster that they've constructed. I do think that the players will improve, in particular Porzingis. But other than that, I mean, if you're a Memphis or a Dallas fan, you have a lot to be happy about. Really not much to be sad about. The only sad thing for both of them is that they're stuck in the West.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's Memphis and Dallas. And, yeah, just give us a subscription and a rating to the podcast. And, yeah.
Away team out.
Away team out.